Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Jennifer Dye. I'm a librarian at Detroit Public Library. We've had a strong program with the League of Women Voters Detroit since September of 2020. We present on issues of concern to Michigan voters about 10 months of the year. You were brought into this program muted. Please put any questions into the chat. Ruth Coolwine will capture these questions and ask them at the end of the presentation. We might be able to allow people to unmute at the end to ask questions directly if time allows. This presentation will be recorded and will be made available on DPL's and the Detroit League's websites. Cheryl, are you prepared to speak briefly about the League and the Detroit group?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not even listed as being here, but I am here.
You're here, I see you listed.
Oh, good. And certainly Susan and Maria both know, I know what we are. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan political organization with national, state, and local components. For a century, we've worked to empower voters by informing citizens from local candidates, public policy, and advocacy programs. We encourage active participation in the political process. The League does not endorse or support candidates or political parties. We conduct candidate forums, registered voters, hold informational meetings, and advocate for voter rights. And we represent Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park. So at any rate, and our membership is open to anyone. We have men and women and anyone that's 16 or over. So and we're very happy to, I know, have our speaker. I just want to say, I contribute to your organization, or at least I have this last round, but you were your organization was the very first webinar, not webinar, but forum that I heard by the Northwest League. And I was so impressed with what you do. So at any rate, I still am, and I have tried to follow you too. So we're really happy to have you here, Nick.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Our speaker tonight is Nicholas Pigeon. He started as executive director of Michigan Campaign Finance Network in January of 2023. MCFN has served as a resource on campaign finance-related news and information for over a quarter of a century. I'll say again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and Ruth will ask them at the end of the presentation. If possible, near the end of the program, we might be able to allow people to turn on mics and ask Nick directly. Nick, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Cheryl. The Michigan Campaign Finance Network has worked a lot with the LWV, particularly the Washtenaw chapter, so I appreciate the work that you do as well over there. I'm going to go ahead and get some slides up. All righty. So Jennifer introduced the network briefly, but just to reiterate and talk about who we are, we're the Michigan Campaign Finance Network is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization that started in 1996 with the altruistic goal of increasing public awareness of the impact that money has on politics. From the beginning, MCFN has been committed to making valuable fact-based information accessible to the people, public, voters, and policymakers so that Michigan can thrive for the people, by the people. So some of the things that we do is we conduct original investigative reporting and research. We do outreach via presentations and training, sort of like the one you're viewing right now. And we serve as a resource for policymakers, journalists, and the public. Well, what we don't do at the network is we don't advocate for specific policies. We are strictly nonpartisan, and we do not accept anonymous donations over $250. So I was asked today to talk a little bit about the history of 2022's Proposal 1. What is Proposal 1 and how did it become a law? What's in the bill and how does it compare to the rest of the country? And then we're going to talk about what it is doing for transparency in Michigan's government. So what was Proposal 1, right? So Proposal 1 was about proposal in 2022 that changed the structure of term limits. So it actually changed that our state representatives in the Senate and the House, they could serve 12 years combined versus 8 in the Senate and 6 in the House. And it also implemented a personal financial disclosure law for state officials. And there's probably a lot of people thinking how could we not have such a law? Well, actually, Michigan and Idaho at that time were the only two states not to have such a law. And Michigan, as seen in the eyes of a lot of watchdog organizations, including the Center for Public Integrity and the Coalition for Integrity, was really docked for its transparency by a large part because of this. We did not have a law that made it so candidates or people currently sitting in public office had to disclose where they're making their personal income, who their client, if they have any clients, what are their business contacts, do they own property, those sorts of things until the beginning of this year. Not to preempt the tale here, but it was not law. On the right is a little ranking that the network put together, kind of demonstrating the features that we see in a lot of these personal financial disclosure laws. And as you can see before Proposal 1 was even spoken about, Michigan was the second to last transparent state, first being Idaho. So there's a history to Proposal 1, right? So if you think back to another really large scale government accountability, transparency change, you kind of think of 2018's Proposal 2, right? We remember the Independent Redistricting Commission that turned into the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission that changed its redistricting, right? Drawing the lines for our members of Congress and our House and Senators and the state legislature was not drawn in the body. Now it's drawn by an independent commission. It got onto the ballot because an organization got enough signatures to put it onto the ballot, right? They needed it's hundreds of thousands of signatures, and it was forced onto the ballot that way. Proposal 1 in 2022 was not placed on the ballot by gathering over 400,000 signatures. It was actually voted on within the legislature in House Joint Resolution 41. But before it was actually passed in the legislature, there were people circulating a petition to put this on the ballot. It was an organization called Voters for Transparency and Term Limits. So, instead of it being put on the ballot, by having to collect all of these, which is a massive effort, it was instead taken up in the legislature. This would be a distinction without much of a difference if the legislature's version of Proposal 1 was the same as Voters for Transparency and Term Limits version. And although much of the language is the same, the legislature's version intentionally weakens the minimum requirements of the law. Let's go through kind of the differences. So we're looking at right now is Proposal 1. There's two versions of it. There is the Voters for Transparency and Term Limits version, the ballot petition that they were circulating, and House Joint Resolution 41, the one that was passed through the legislature to put that ballot initiative on the ballot for people to vote for in 2022. As you can see, it's laid out very similarly, right? This section, Section 10.2, is a section that lists everything that that public officials will have to disclose in these forms when the legislature is forced to pass that bill. And it's organized very, very much the same. So assets and unearned income, purchases, sales, or exchanges of a security or real property, earned income, liabilities, positions held as an officer, director, trustee of an organization, partner, proprietor, representative, employee, or consultant of any corporation, agreements or arrangements with respect to future employment, a leave of absence while serving as a state Senate officer, continuation or deferral of payments by a former or current employer other than the state of Michigan, or continuing participation in an employee welfare or benefit plan maintained by a former employer. And lastly, gifts as defined in Section 4 of 1978 Public Act, blah, 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 and travel payments and reimbursements without any qualifiers, and payments made by others to a charity in lieu of honoraria. Well, how was the bill actually? What was the language that was actually passed? So a description of assets and sources of unearned income. We'll go into why that's important later. Purchases, sales, or exchanges of security or real property is removed. Sources of earned income, description of liabilities, positions held in all of those ways. They actually added some here. Agreements with respect to future employment, gifts received and required to be reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent as prescribed by state law. This is an interesting one because receiving a gift by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent, is illegal. So it's kind of interesting what they're asking to be reported here. Travel payments and reimbursements received and required to be reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent. So we'll go into why this is kind of a huge hole for transparency in the state, but it's not just travel payments and reimbursements by everyone. It's travel payments and reimbursements received and required to be reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent under state law, which are things that are already reported if the lobbyist has to report them on their end. And the same thing for payments made to a charity in lieu of honoraria was added only from lobbyist agents. So what I just walked through this exemplifies, right? It's the same language, but things are modified. Some were removed. This just walks through exactly what I spelled out. So we all know that in 2022, at a margin of 2-1, 66% of voters approved of Proposal 1. And this does not mean that this became the law of the land instantaneously. How it works is that this proposal passed, and then the legislature was forced to be tasked with implementing this law by the end of the year in 2022. And the deadline was December 31st. They had to implement it in 2023. And the deadline for this was December 31st, 2023. So let's look at what was exactly in the bill that went to pass. So the legislature, and I'll kind of get into the story of what this looked like. They took it up. One of the last things that they did take up in the legislative session, there wasn't much committee time spent on it. This is the final agreed upon set of bills that went for a vote. So what's in the bill, right? A public officer, right? These are the people that are included: state representatives, state senators, the attorney general, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the secretary of state, including candidates for this as well. So in some other states, it's only the public officials that have to file these personal financial disclosures. In Michigan and about half of other states, also candidates running for this position have to make similar disclosures. So these public officials and candidates for these offices will file disclosures starting this year. So what will they have to describe? A description of sources and earned income without specific income disclosure. So it says the full name, mailing address, telephone number, and email address of the public officer, and the name and address of the public officer's employer and the positions held during the reporting period if the public officer receives $1,000 or more in annual income from each position. So what's not required here, which is different than most of the rest of the country, is you don't have to describe the actual amount in a specific number or a range. So in many other states, you have to say, I received from 1,000 to 25,000, 25,000 to 100,000 from this source of income. In Michigan, if the source is over $1,000, you have to list this, but you don't have to list the amount necessarily that is received. The name of the spouse of the public officer, the occupation of the public officer's spouse, and the name of the employer or employers of the public officer's spouse. So they have to list their spouse, and whether the public officer's spouse is registered as a lobbyist or lobbyist agent under the Public Act that spells out lobbying in Michigan. I'm going to go over sort of what spousal requirements look like in other states, but this is a pretty weak one compared to the rest of the country. And this is the one that kind of got a lot of flag in the news media when they were considering this bill. So we see a list of all the positions that I named. So even if you're not, making money from a position, you still have to list if you're an officer, director, trustee, blah, blah, blah. It does not count for positions held in any religious, social, fraternal, or political entity or positions that are solely of an honorary nature. This is pretty common through the rest of the country. So except as otherwise provided in this subdivision, a list of each asset, excluding a business asset held for investment or production of income with a fair market value of 1,000 or more during the reporting period, and any sources of unearned income that exceed $200 during the reporting period. The fair market value for the purpose of listing, excluding a business asset held for investment or production of income under the subdivision, must be adjusted for inflation every 4 years. So the threshold is adjusted for inflation, but they'll have to list assets that are worth over $1,000. So this is something that was added from just the bare bones requirement that was passed in Proposal 1. So except as otherwise provided in the subdivision, a list of any stocks, bonds, or other forms of securities held by the public officer or held jointly with the public officer's spouse during the reporting period if the security has a total aggregate fair market value of 1,000 or more. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but there is a provision in there that says a list of securities, unless they're in a fund that is widely diversified or the officer has no ability to exercise control over the financial interests held by the fund. How widely diversified does it have to be? It's not necessarily stated. We're gonna have to see what this looks like in practice, and we'll get into that. But could a public official put stock into a portfolio that is in the same sector and still make decisions with insider knowledge? That's sort of kind of what I'm getting at here. It's widely diversified. There's not much to know exactly what counts as widely diversified in the law as it stands. They'll have to disclose agreements of future employment. This is pretty common across the rest of the country with these laws. And so this stayed the same from what the public passed in Proposal 2 to what it looked like in the final bill, right? So a list of all gifts received and reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent under state law, a list of all travel payments received and reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent under state law, and a list of each payment made by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent to a charity in lieu of honoraria. So the issue here with this is that what commonly happens, what people hear about, this is talking about dark money, is that people hear about administrative accounts and administrative costs being paid by 501c4 organizations, which are the national nonprofits that are the dark money vehicle, right? And so those are the organizations that will pay for travel payments and reimbursements for our members of the state legislature to go on fact-finding missions. You have to list all travel payments received and reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent registered under state law, meaning registered in Michigan. That doesn't include what most of the travel reimbursements and payments are, which are directly from 501c4 accounts. So in the rest of the country, not every state, but a lot of states, if this is outright banned that 501c4s can pay for travel, if they have to disclose it, it's disclosed in these laws, and Michigan did not end up including it. Let me see what's next here before I go. So before I go into that, the MCFN did testify, when this went into committee to bring it to the House. I don't know if people kind of remember some of the news media going on, but there's a lot of questions about how far this went compared to the rest of the country. And I kind of want to share some of the comments I made at the time before this was made into law. Spoiler alert, what you're looking at is the final version that was passed. But there are a few other packages that they were considering, and let me share another document I have. Okay. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit for everyone. So some of the things I brought up to the Senate Oversight Committee, which that's where this bill, these bills originated in the Senate. They were Senate Bill 613 through 616. Some of the things I commented on, I wanted to compare this law to what it looked like to the rest of the country. And so what I spoke about was the requirement for candidates for public office, not just those who were elected, to file the financial disclosure statement, is a strong requirement only half of other states have. So I mentioned this. In many other states, only people currently in office have to do this, not just candidates. In Michigan, if you're a candidate, you also have to file it in April as well. The $1,000 reporting threshold for reporting sources of earned and unearned income is in line with most other states. However, as the law stands, it is not clear if candidates and public officials will have to state the dollar amount received during the reporting period. So I spoke about this. Most other states, you have to categorically say, I made X from X source, X from another source. In Michigan, you would just have to list it, the name and the telephone number, what it is, describe it, not the amount that's received by that source of earned or unearned income. Yes, I talked about the exception for the widely diversified stocks. So I mentioned that before this bill was passed. Most states require some sort of disclosure of the filer's spouse's income and occupation, with many extending this requirement to all immediate household members and requiring them to file their own annual statement. The spousal requirement in Senate Bill 613 and 614, the bills that made it to this final passed version, is weaker in comparison to the rest of the country, since there is no categorical or actual dollar disclosure of the spousal sources of earned or unearned income. And so what it says in this bill is that all you have to do is list your spouse's name and the industry that they work for. That's not really giving a lot of information. They don't have to list even specifically who they work for. In many other states, spouses and even members of the immediate household have to file a similar financial disclosure report as a candidate. This one is pretty weak compared to the rest of the country. I went into specifically what I just spoke about, that Senate Bill 613 will only require the disclosure of gifts and travel payments received and reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent under state law. This does not require the disclosure of any new information and avoids the disclosure of the majority of paid for travel in Lansing directly paid out of 501c4 accounts. The public has no way of knowing how much is spent on travel for Michigan's public officials on fact-finding missions, since 501c4s only have to disclose an unitemized total of the amount spent on travel in their Form 990. So again, that travel that you've heard about before, that our representatives being paid to go to another state, another country, and live lavishly and get paid for that. That's still not going to be disclosed in the law that I was looking at the time, and what would become the final version of the law. The other thing I mentioned is that few other states delegate enforcement authority of their financial disclosure law to the Secretary of State. Oh, I think my audio went out for a sec. Sorry about that. I had my other headphones connect. Good. Few other states delegate enforcement authority of their financial disclosure law to the Secretary of State. Many other states have an independent ethics body, or joint or single chambers ethics committee investigate complaints and issue fines. Additionally, the penalty for knowingly filing an incomplete or inaccurate report is a civil fine of not more than $1,000, which is lower than many other states. So those are the comments I shared, before that passed. Now let's talk about, what happened after those comments and when it did pass. Let me share the slides again. So on I don't know if anyone saw this on the last night of session in 2023 at 2:45 a.m. I stayed up to watch it. It was past my bedtime. The House passed the Senate's package of the financial disclosure bills, the ones that I commented on in that document you saw before. And they quickly gavelled down any amendments. So there were amendments offered by representatives on both sides of the aisle, and so they gavelled them down. What that means is that without consideration, without taking a vote, gavel down. Specifically, Representative Skaggs and Burns offered an alternative package in the House the week before that had more stringent spousal disclosure requirements and had 10 times the fines, but it was never considered in the House. Only the Senate's version was considered. So this package that, in 2022, voters passed this in November, and knowing that the deadline would be December 31st of 2023, so they had all that time. This was the last thing to be passed in last year's legislative session. This financial disclosure package that the voters wanted. So many of us were kind of disappointed and were, wanted it to be stronger than the baseline that was in proposal one, because it was weakened, like we went over, from the original ballot petition to what was passed through the legislature. There were a lot of concerns about the things that I raised and other people in the media raised. But that's how the cookie crumbled, and that's how it was passed.
Goodness.
So a quick point I did mention a little bit, but how is it enforced, right? So the Secretary of State will maintain a public database of these filings and is responsible for investigating complaints filed, right? So we know that there will have to be, and I'll get into kind of what this looks like. I can't answer too many questions about it. I'll get into why, but what the act said is that the Secretary of State is tasked with maintaining a public database where you'll be able to see these filings online. Late filings have a maximum fine of $1,000, which can be paid out of their committee to elect. So the campaign committee itself can pay the $1,000. It isn't fined on the representative himself. Knowingly filing inaccurate reports can cost $2,000 maximum. That's a pretty low penalty compared to the rest of the country. I mean, in most other states, it is limited to financial penalties, but some states you could be prosecuted, you could be barred from taking a seat for not filing these. One thing I also just wanted to say about this is that, the main enforcement mechanism are complaints brought by members of the public and people viewing these. So I didn't add it in these slides, but it goes into a process where someone files a complaint. The Secretary of State has 45 days to investigate it. There's a response period, and that's the main enforcement mechanism, right? Are people making the complaint, signaling it to the Secretary of State, and it's handled within the Secretary of State's office. So in a lot of other states, this could be, a committee investigates this and can, start their own investigations without a complaint. But, also in many states, a complaint is kind of what starts, someone saying, hey, this was an inaccurately filed report, or they haven't filed. That's how it is in Michigan. Yes, I went into, again, just reiterating the gifts received and required to be reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent. I said that these are mainly paid out of 501c4s. So, by restricting it to gifts, travel payments, and payments made by a lobbyist agent to a charity in lieu of honoraria, right? Only having those by lobbyist agents under state law prohibits, makes it so that you don't have to disclose these travel payments by 501c4s. And 501c4s, you're looking at a statement of expenses, right? So this is what it looks like when a 501c4 has disclosed what they spend their money on, and it's an unitemized showing. So you could see this particular fund paid $288,000 in travel and $142,000 for payments of travel or entertainment expenses for any federal, state, or local public official. So it's not disclosed on the 501c4 side. In Michigan, it's still not disclosed on the representative side unless it's made by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent registered in Michigan. This one in particular was MCFN and Bridge partner on a story that was kind of circulated about former Speaker Lee Chatfield regularly flying out, taking, missing votes, taking a lot of trips, paying for a lot of trips. This is the fund for 1 year that was in question here, the Peninsula Fund. So this is a Michigan. This is a 501c4 that was acting and doing these travel payments in Michigan. So that to me was the biggest hole for transparency, and that's what a lot of people spoke about in the news media as well. So what does the law look like in practice, right? Because now it's 2024. They passed this law in November, and the due date is April 15th of this year for the first round of these personal financial disclosures, right? So this is what I got. This is from the Secretary of State's website. So candidates and office holders will get information on how to use a brand new electronic system on or before Thursday, March 14th, this Thursday. This will be separate from MERTS. So MERTS is the software that state legislators use to file their campaign finance reports. It's going to be a separate system. And spoiler alert, we still don't know because it was supposed to be, we're supposed to know about the system on or before this Thursday, but it hasn't happened yet. So what we do have is this form that is given. So starting in April 2024, certain state level officers and candidates have to file. It speaks about what we previously spoke about, who does these filings, information they have to disclose. An electronic filing system is under development by the Bureau of Elections. Each filer will be required to obtain a state of Michigan MI login. Right. So if we go on the website right now, this is what you see, the report due dates. It's due by April 15th. And we see the Bureau of Elections is tasked with creating an electronic reporting system, manuals, forms, and instructions, which will be found at this site. Please bookmark this page and check back on it before March 14th. So I was really hoping I could dive into this and see more about what this looks like. It's unlikely that I would be able to go into the actual apparatus to file this because I couldn't get an ID as a representative. But I would have liked to see somebody submit their report and see what that looks like, or see just a little bit more, but we don't quite know yet. So what I want to take a moment and do is look at kind of what this looks like in other states. So let me bring up another page I got. Okay. Gosh, where is it? Yeah, I guess we could do this. It's making me show the whole computer screen. I hope this can be seen, but so this is what it looks like if you are a state official filing this personal financial disclosure statement in Colorado. So they do not have to have an electronic filing system. This is a form they have to file, then email it to the Colorado Secretary of State. But I wanted to just view it because this might be kind of what it looks like on the electronic system for our members to file. So you fill out your name, your address, stuff like that. You're filing as an office holder, a candidate, what district. Here, this is like us. The recipient of income, so you have to say if it's the spouse. Well, actually, you wouldn't have to say that. In Michigan, you only have to list your spouse's if they're a lobbyist and if they who their what their employment sector is. So you wouldn't even have to list that. So you would have to show your sources of income, the source, and you wouldn't have to put a range amount. You would just have to list it if it's above $1,000 in Michigan. Sources of compensation. So in Michigan, this would kind of be unearned income, lobbying. So here's your assets, right? more specific property. You know, I'm assuming that in Michigan, you know, this will be kind of the form, but it'll be an online system. We just don't quite know what that looks like yet. So what does it look like when you are a citizen and you get to view, what does it kind of look like if there's an online system for viewing this? So let's look at that. So this is California, the Fair Political Practices Commission. So they call it a Form 700. So if you wanted to see your personal financial disclosure from someone in the state legislature, I have it pulled up. A legislature in the state assembly filed from the beginning of March this year. Let's just go to Assembly Member Juan Alanis. And so I assume it'll kind of be like this, right? So you could see all the statements of financial interest that they filed. Pull up a PDF. I'm not so sure how well you could see this because I had to. I'll just go ahead and download. So I could zoom in. All right. Right. So we see their form. So they're business entities, right? So this person owns Sophia's Rustic Boutique, fair market value of $2,000 to $10,000. Right. So I mean, different states are gonna have different ways of what they call things, but you're not gonna see a range of how much our representatives are making from their sources of earned or unearned income, but you're gonna see it listed. They'll have to list their property kind of like this. And this is okay, so this is them. So up here they would have to describe their business relationships, right? Like in Michigan, and then this is specifically how much they're making from different sources of income. But again, in Michigan, you won't see the amount in a categorical range. Gifts only by lobbyists and lobbyist agents registered in Michigan under state law, so that is already legal in Michigan. So I'm kind of wondering what they're expecting representatives to write there. But for everything here in California, they have to list that from all the different associations. These travel. Yes, mark the 501c3 box for a travel payment received from a nonprofit 501c3 organization, or the speech box if you made a speech. So, right, having to disclose if they made money or if they had a travel reimbursement or payment. You won't see this in Michigan unless it's by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent. But again, it's mostly from 501c organizations. So I guess I meant to pull this up to kind of show what this will look like, and it'll kind of look like this database. You'll be able to download a PDF, but California does have one of the most stringent personal financial disclosure laws. They've had it since the 70s. So there are some differences from what you're going to see in Michigan. Let me go back to my slides really quick. Nope, that's all right. Why isn't it? I'm having some of those technical difficulties myself. Okay. So, back just to bring this back to kind of where we started, right? So I did the scoring method to see, well, how well does this improve Michigan from before having this law till after? It did not create an independent ethics committee. The ethics committee does have to disclose a complaint to a respondent. Does the ethics committee have the power to strongly sanction? I don't know if $1,000 from the campaign to pay for a late filing or $2,000 doesn't really count really as a strong sanction. The lower bound of income disclosure requirements, it is low, but they don't have to actually describe the amount. The restriction on gifts or honoraria is only source based from these lobbyists and lobbyist agents, not from 501c organizations. Business association disclosure, yes, that is in the law. Client identification, yes. Household member disclosure, very limited. So this does improve transparency here in the state of Michigan from not having this law in the first place, which is a huge mark, in the eyes of transparency watchdogs for our states, to having a law that, to rank it to the compared to the rest of the country, probably on the weaker side. It has some strong points, it has some weak points, but this is important for adding transparency to our public officials, having this law. And I spoke to many representatives, and what they said is that this is a baseline, we could add to it in the future. We'll see if that happens, but that's kind of the history of this law. And as much as I can show you right now what it looks like, please check back on the Secretary of State's website this Thursday to see if we could see more about what the system looks like, and what the database looks like as a voter, as an individual, to go and view these statements of financial interest. So of course we're open for questions. Just I just want to quickly put in my email. We always accept tips@mcfn.org. I can share around our mailing list, and we always ask for a contribution to support independent journalism and work like what you've seen today. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any in the chat.
So I don't see any in the chat yet, but maybe we'll give folks this thorough discussion. Maybe we'll give folks a second to think about those and put them in. I have a couple questions of my own that maybe you could spend some time answering. One is, like, is there any sort of concrete or measurable? I know it's a very hard thing because all the states have different laws and all the states have different populations, everything like that. But are there any measurable differences that can be sort of distilled from states that tend to have more stringent requirements versus weaker requirements?
Sure. I have thought about this question before. It is hard to answer because kind of the catch-22 with implementing a lot of these transparency laws is that voters get more cynical, and they think worse of their government after these transparency laws are passed, because they actually see it versus being covered and it's on their minds. So this probably doesn't help much with voters and people saying, okay, Michigan's a more transparent state now. It's very rare that candidates or people in state offices are fined or prosecuted under these laws. There isn't really a standard metric. I wouldn't say that this law, you could predict a state's transparency, or how little, or if they're a state that has a lot of what's it called, corruption or whatnot. It takes many laws in different facets to say, okay, this state has more corruption scandals or whatnot. This is definitely a part of it, but not the sole reason why that is.
Yeah, thanks. And then it's interesting that it makes for less trust. That's an interesting thing. What about how high, like, what's the range of fines for violations, or like filing late in other states? Like, what's the sort of highest example or lowest example? You know that?
I did have a sheet with me when I testified to the Senate Oversight Committee. I could just try to look for it very quickly, but off the top of my head, I know that, there are many states where the fines were, they weren't levied to the campaign committee. If a statement was late, you could not be seated until it was filed. That's a pretty stringent one, right? That was actually being considered here in Michigan too, but did not make the final cut. And also just larger fines. I mean, I think there were some over $50,000, not capped to just $2,000. So in other states, it was, that was a very low threshold or fine amount in this state compared to the rest of the country, and not having much action to investigate or to not seat them or any other repercussions. That's a lot of other states had those things.
Yeah. And then do you have any clarity? I know it's still very new in implementation, but if there is a complaint made against someone for inaccurately filing, would they then have to submit a more complete or full report? How does that get investigated?
That's a good question. So I thought about kind of going into looking at the law itself. I got it pulled up somewhere here. The law goes into a huge thing. So a complainant must satisfy all of these requirements. They have to sign it themselves, so it can't be anonymous, which is unfortunate because some other states you could, it's not, the complainant doesn't have to disclose themselves to the person they're making a complaint about. Some would say that maybe that's a good thing. They're afraid of, political redress or, complaining about someone who's more powerful than them. That is something to say. They have to state their name, address, telephone number, include the complainant's certification that to the best of the complainant's knowledge, information, and belief, formed after a reasonable inquiry under these circumstances, each factual contention of the complaint is supported by the evidence. A person shall not file a complaint with a false certificate under that section. And that's really it. So it's, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a standard form. It's, just kind of like an affidavit or a complaint sent to the Secretary of State. And then it says the Secretary of State shall investigate allegations brought under this act. If an allegation involves Secretary of State or the Secretary of State's spouse, the Secretary of State shall refer the matter to the Attorney General. And so later on, it says that she has 45 business days. 45 days after receiving a complaint under subsection 5, the Secretary of State shall post on the Secretary of State's website whether there may be a reason to believe that a violation has occurred. So they have 45 days to post maybe something happened. And then if they believe that there was wrongdoing, she has 30 days after that determination to post on the state's website any complaint, response, or rebuttal statement received under the subsection. So there's a lot to say. It does describe a timeline. It describes, what are the what the complainant has to do, but it's not very standardized as of yet. So we'll still have to see kind of what this looks like. And I was hoping to have more answers on that, but it looks like it's kind of going to be on March 14th, the day that it must be posted.
Yeah. Maybe we'll have a recap in a few more months or a year from now or something. So it sounds like the onus is on the complainant to find the evidence and to sort of.
But yeah, you did.
Sorry, Cheryl, did you have something that you wanted to add? Sorry. Okay. So it sounds like the onus is on the complainant, and then is their address and phone number made public, or is that for the Secretary of State and like whoever is dealing with? Is that not clear? Maybe.
I'm not sure. Reading this, I don't really see. I mean, the complaint has to be made public if there is if the Secretary of State believes there's a violation. It doesn't say much about them posting that. I think that's a good question. I'm going to try to get that answer.
Yeah, because that seems like it could also reduce the amount of complaining that might occur, not only having to have the name out there, but having your personal livelihood and details put out there. Yeah, okay. Those are the majority of my questions. I wonder if there's anyone else who has any questions. Maybe Jennifer, we can open it up for people to turn on mics.
Glad to do that. Would anyone like to ask Nick a question directly? please raise your hand. Come down to the reactions at the bottom of the screen. Oh, Cheryl. I don't have to release you. You're already released.
I can't, anyway,
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
okay, well, that's good, I guess. Any rate, there was an article in the Free Press on the, and actually it was the editorial page of the Detroit News on the Sunday Free Press. Did you see that, Nick, at all? It was about Michigan must keep its FOIA promise. But to me, this is related to this because they talk about how, I mean, transparency to me is not just finances, it's also policies, and it's the documents that are created. So, and all of that kind of goes together, it seems like. But what, you know, this Len Niehoff, who is the, he's a University of Michigan professor and a lawyer for arbitrating problems that the news has. Any rate, he not only talked about the fact that they've never gone very far with really granting real access to documents that there are many exceptions and many kind of ways they have of subverting that. But the other issue that he brought up, which just seemed interesting given what Ruth asked, was the sense of one of the things that they don't do and other states do is 30 states have an anti-SLAPP statute, and I know you're aware of that. An important tool for getting rid of meritless lawsuits that were filed to try to bully an individual or media entity out of exercising their rights under the First Amendment of Michigan. And we don't have such a law. Is the SLAPP statutes, can it be used? Is that a concern in making a complaint that we're going to have spurious lawsuits that aren't legitimate at all, taking up time?
I think that's a good question. I mean, you're wondering if a complaint is made and the Secretary of State doesn't think there's anything to investigate, or maybe she wrongly thinks there is something to investigate and it was done, with the complainant with knowledge that there's nothing there. They, or the candidate tries to make that claim that they're being, this complaint is being levied on them for an issue, and they have more resources and they're able to sue that complainant. Yeah, I haven't really thought about that. I mean, this whole process doesn't take place in the courts. I don't know how much standing there is for, a representative to be able to sue a complainant. I don't know if that counts as libel, or they can make a case for libel, from these complaints made for their personal financial disclosure statements. I'm not sure. And to go to that other point you were talking a little bit about FOIA, what Michigan is different than most other states is that the governor's office and lieutenant governor's office does not have to respond to FOIA requests, and that's something that they've been talking about changing. This week, last year, was designated Sunshine Week here in Michigan. So there's National Sunshine Week, but it's actually Sunshine Week here in Michigan. I will be testifying at the House Ethics and Oversight Committee and kind of going through a lot of campaign finance stuff, talking a lot about dark money. I don't know exactly what, but I've seen a lot of posts on Twitter today of Democratic leaders saying that they want to put some legislation up for Sunshine Week, and one of the things was mentioned is expanding FOIA to the governor and stuff like that. So, who's to say, what we talked about might change, and some of these things that are issues here in Michigan, maybe people are taking it more seriously because of actions like Proposal 1 in 2022. being something that people actually cared about and came out in droves to support. Government ethics is something you're hearing a lot about nowadays. So I feel like our legislators are taking it more seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Maria, you have your hand up? I've unmuted, I've given you
Yes,
permission to
can you hear
unmute.
me? I hope everybody can hear me. Yeah,
Yes.
I just wanted to say, first of all, Nick Pigeon, thank you so much. You may recall that you spoke to our group up in LWV Oakland area. And and you were with Hank Mayers, and it was just a terrific presentation. And again, this evening, you've given us so much information. I'm overwhelmed and and a little bit discouraged, but you know what? As you say, hey, at least it's something. At least we're going somewhere. And anyways, and the other thing is I have to go to another meeting. So I really want to thank you for your time this evening and thank you for doing this. So take care and good night.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, I'm always happy to. I've done a few different presentations for and with the League of Women Voters, and I always appreciate getting the invitation to speak.
Well, very good. Does anyone else have a question? Cheryl?
Yes, I agree with Maria. It was great and a lot of stuff. And I assume we will on the recording have your documentation, or can it be sent separately? Your presentation?
Yeah, I can make this, I can send this to the organizers, and it could be made public if that's something that could be done on the Detroit Public Library side.
That would be great, I think.
Yeah.
Jennifer, we can do that, right?
I think so.
Okay. The other thing is, how many people actually make a complaint, and will that information be made available, or what? I mean, or what their complaints were? Will we be able to see all of that from the Secretary of State and her assessment?
So, in reading the statute, it seems like unless the Secretary of State agrees with the complaint that she feels that there is something to investigate here, then it won't be made public. But if she does, then it is made public. How many complaints there will be, I'm not sure. There really aren't many complaints filed in other states. The argument is that having to do this in the first place, maybe it encourages our representatives to not have conflicts of interest or engage in shady deals. But there really aren't many complaints made in other states. I haven't seen too much about a database for viewing those, but our statute in Michigan does say that those complaints will have to be posted if the Secretary of State agrees with them and then posts her findings in that time period that we discussed prior.
No. Thank you. I was wondering about that, so.
Yeah, we're really gonna have to check back on March 14th to see kind of what this looks like. And ultimately, April 15th is the first deadline. So at that time, per the legislation, we will have some sort of infrastructure to view these reports and to make a complaint. Yeah, the statute doesn't really say much about how this complaint process is. The Secretary of State's website might say that's just an email. Maybe there will be a form that you fill out there. It's not something that's detailed in statute, so we're still waiting on kind of what this looks like in practice.
I have one more question, if I could ask it. And that is the difference between a candidate's transparency in filling out these forms and a legislator is, I didn't realize that a candidate would have to do that, which sounds fine. I think that's great. But is there something as citizens we would look at for candidates versus elected officials? I mean, would we be looking at well, we can't really see much about who's supporting them other than, their jobs and some donations from some places. But it sounds like for the most part, the dark money will not ever, we won't find out, or the 401c4s. So what is the difference between, in looking at these, as you would look at them or analyze them?
Sure. Well, this is an issue that was listed as a campaign finance bill in Michigan, but it is not campaign finance. What we're talking about this law are the personal finances of these representatives. And people have kind of asked me, well, why do you care at the Michigan Campaign Finance Network? Other than just we've been talking about transparency and ethics in Michigan's government. One argument is that things can be cross-referenced if you have to describe your personal income and then you receive, then you could analyze it, compare it to campaign finance, which is much more robust and rigorous, especially when it comes to, the campaign committee, the committee to elect that they have to manage, as a candidate. We could compare, they're making money personally here and receiving money in a campaign, and they're voting this way, right? It's just more information for voters and investigators to be able to utilize. As for candidates and people currently in office have to file the same form, so it's the same exact form. And of course, candidates, from the inception of their candidate committee have to file the same campaign finance reports as people currently in office. People in office have to keep filing campaign finance reports and now this personal finance report, even when they're in office, at less regular intervals when it's not campaign season. This is yearly, this personal financial, but not to get too off track. So they have to file the same form as representatives and file campaign finance reports as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I muted myself for a moment and then I forgot. Thank you very much, Nick. And you've given us a lot to think about. I need to review it a bit before I can really come up with intelligent questions. But I know I've been hearing a lot about freedom of information, kerfuffles, people not releasing things that other people say they are supposed to. Which is, of course, as you said, a different issue. Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Yes,
Pleasure to be
thank
here.
you.
And thank you, Cheryl and Ruth, as usual.
Ruth had good questions. And Nick, I think your organization really does a great job of bringing at least information to us that we normally aren't going to be able to have in any other way. So thank you.
Well, no, I appreciate that, and I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing. I appreciate your charitable contribution, Cheryl, and I'm glad to be able to talk about these issues, and I am going to be testifying tomorrow. The Senate Oversight, the House Ethics and Oversight Committee is tomorrow after session. When it ends is variable, but I'm going to be kind of describing, really getting into the weeds about the differences between the different fundraising vehicles, talking about 501c4s, everything from campaign committees, 501c4s, and ranking them from transparent to least transparent. So I'll make that footage available afterwards, probably on our website, if that's something anyone's interested in.
Okay, that'd be great.
Of course.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks.
Goodbye,
Thanks,
Nick.
everyone.
We may have you come
Bye,
back
Mary
soon
Jo.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
because there is more that's obviously in progress.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Looking forward
right.
to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.